Hello, everybody. Happy EEKtober. We are doing 31 days of scary movies, and today is day 29. I'm your host, Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker, and when I speak, my topic is Take the Doughnut, which is another way to say Carpe Diem. It comes from this weird thing that happened in college where I left an actual donut on a table. It became an object lesson for me and what it looks like to leave an opportunity behind. So I don't want to do that anymore. I want to take the donut now. From time to time, I'll issue myself a take the donut challenge. If there's something that I want to do, I'll make it official. I'll call it a challenge. And that helps me hold myself accountable to doing that thing. But this time I'm actually opening it up for anybody who wants to join. So here we are, 31 days of scary movies. Today is day 29 and we are watching The Shining from 1980. And this is, I put it in psychological as a category, but supernatural probably works here as well. This is directed, of course, by Stanley Kubrick. It was written by, so there was a book that was written by Stephen King. The screenplay was written by Stanley Kubrick and Diana Johnson. Stephen King, we know now, does not like this film. Like there were departures from the book that he was not on board with, and he isn't a fan. But it was inspired by the book. This stars Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny, and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran. And so the other thing to know is that while this was originally based on Stephen King's book, and Stephen King was not a fan of the finished product of this film, it should also be said that in this universe, so Stephen King also has a book called Dr. Sleep, and that was then adapted into a sequel to this film by Mike Flanagan in 2019, and that did get Stephen King's blessing. Mike Flanagan has made something of a name for himself in getting people with amazing pedigrees in the horror world to give him their blessing on upcoming projects. So very exciting stuff. I've got one Mike Flanagan film on my list for EEKtober, and that is Hush on October 31st. So stay tuned for that. So good. But yeah, this one was not Stephen King's favorite. And there is a particular change from the book. It's been a long time since I read the book, but there's a particular change from the book that I do think fundamentally changes your understanding of this film. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Let me start with some general notes, because look, I know that this is a film that a lot of people love. Maybe you're coming to this video because it's your very first time watching The Shining. And if so, I can't wait to hear what you think about it. Welcome. There's a lot of people who love this movie. It's iconic. But it's just as likely, in fact, more likely, that you've seen this movie, you know this movie, and you maybe know it better than I do. So I'm going to, try to find a middle ground here in this EEKtober coverage, to sort of put some spin, some interpretation, some of my thoughts on what I'm seeing in this film. And I'd like to start with some general notes, especially with the idea that there may be people who are coming to this who've seen the film and don't need a full recap. So, of course, this film is iconic. And I think pound for pound, I don't know, I don't want to make any huge claims with this, but pound for pound, like every single scene of this film has something iconic in it. You'd be hard pressed to find a lot of other films with this many iconic images, moments, lines. Just everything about this is something that lasts. And that takes a lot of vision and a lot of effort. So, while Stephen King might not love this film, I think what Stanley Kubrick absolutely stands on its own, no matter how you view the book, because there are indelible images and moments that will stick with us forever. And I'm sorry, that's just how I feel about this, regardless of where it lands in terms of was the book better or was the movie better. That they're both their own thing. And in fact, I do remember reading the book when I was a lot younger, and the scariest image to me didn't even make the film. So, and it had to do with, I believe, moving topiary garden chasing Danny. And just the very idea of that freaked me out. But they, practically speaking, that would have been really hard to pull off in this film. They didn't even try. And so, I see these as two very separate entities. One thing that has been analyzed at length by others, but I think you absolutely feel it, even if you haven't analyzed it, is how disorienting the Overlook actually is. Because there are moments that you're going through the Overlook and you're thinking, gosh, it's a long way to get from here to here, or gosh, wait, where is this hallway now? And in fact, people have tried to map this out and it doesn't quite work the way they've laid it out, which tells me that was on purpose, that it was not an issue of continuity, because I think it's fair to say that Stanley Kubrick was rigorous in the details. So if the Overlook seems to be confusing, that feels intentional, that the Overlook's supposed to feel confusing to us. Let's talk a little bit about the people. First of all, I'd like to talk about Shelley Duvall. I believe that she passed away this year, and I believe she's not been well for a very long time. So I want to start with her because Shelley Duvall's performance in this film has been panned by many, but I love her in this film. Sorry, I do. I know her first from Fairy Tale Theaters, which was like I don't know, was that a limited run series in the 80s where they got all of these incredible actors to do fairy tales, like short productions of fairy tales, maybe like hour-long episodes. And so many of the fairy tales that you can name, there were people who were stars then and were going to be even bigger stars later that you can absolutely recognize, household names doing fairy tales, and Shelley Duvall narrated all of them. And she was in a couple as a main character. So I remember her first from that. Really big jump between that and this. But Shelley Duvall has a very particular voice, a very particular look, a very particular style. That's just her. That's who she is. And she has this this very soft voice and this almost adolescent voice that comes out of her body. And I actually think it works really well with how I interpret this relationship in this film. And this is where I think the interpretation between the movie and the book may in fact be different. But what we're seeing in this film, I actually think Shelley Duvall was an excellent choice for this because she encapsulates some things that work for me in how I'm thinking about the relationship between Jack and Wendy. I see Wendy as a victim of abuse fairly long term. And I see that Jack has always been ominous. He is creepy from the very beginning of the movie. And I guess I need to say that I've always found Jack Nicholson creepy. Maybe it's because of this film. Maybe it's because of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Maybe it's because of his face. I don't know. But I find him creepy to look at. So when he's been in roles where he's not supposed to be creepy, I don't believe that. I believe he was in As Good as It Gets. And I was like, nope, sorry, not a love interest. Can't do it. Cannot do this. I don't know if it's his look or if there's some sort of energy he's exuding through the screen. It could be a little bit of both, but for me, this man is creepy. So when you cast him in this role, I have to overcome that if you're going to tell me that he's not supposed to start as creepy. But I think this film does have him start as creepy. I think that he has an anger issue. I think he's had it for a long time. And I think that in the real world, when you see a relationship that's been somewhat long-standing and there's abuse involved, you can look at this relationship 5 years in, 10 years in, 20 years in, and you can say, I don't see how they got here. I don't see why she would put up with that or why he would put up with that. I don't see how they couldn't have stopped this thing earlier. And I'm here to tell you that is how this works, because it doesn't start with the worst offenses. It starts with an offense, maybe a lesser one. And then they're so sorry. And then you forgive them. And then they do it again. And it escalates, because every time we get into this pattern of something is done wrong and then you want to walk away. You don't love what you saw, but you remember the good stuff, and then they apologize in a really effective way, and you're like, they love me though, and I don't want to tear everything apart just for that. And you keep coming back, and it becomes a cycle. It becomes a pattern of abuse, and then love bombing or apologizing in a big way that brings you back in. And in the end, it's a cycle that both people are in some way feeding off of. And so I look at Wendy, and I see a woman who is scared to use her own voice, who has absolutely seen, she has absolutely clocked some things in her relationship with Jack and Jack's relationship with Danny that are not good. And she has found ways to explain them to herself to stay in this relationship. It's a tale as old as time. And if you don't like it, there are a lot of relationships in the real world that we can point to, and maybe some of us who are watching this have experienced them ourselves. So when I see Wendy and I see her having this very quiet voice that she is afraid to use, this almost maybe not all the way childlike, but way too young for the body that she's in. I feel like her development was arrested. She became scared to use her voice, and the repercussions of using her voice have probably existed in the past. And so for me, Shelley Duvall needs to have this demeanor. Wendy needs to have this demeanor, because actually it wouldn't make a ton of sense to me if she had a much stronger demeanor, because I do think that person would have left the relationship already. I think that she has fallen into this cycle. So for everybody who's not so sure about Shelley Duvall, that's my 2 cents. And I spent a fair amount of time on that because for me, that makes the rest of this movie make sense. Now, Jack Nicholson, of course, if you read it that way, that's a problem for Stephen King because Stephen King, I think in the book, he was really trying to show you that Jack was fine, and then the hotel got a hold of him and made him bad. But in this film, Jack's bad from the beginning. He's always been bad. And so that makes me have to look at this film in a different way. Like, was he dead the whole time? Was he was he possessed for his entire life by this hotel? Does the hotel have its tethers into a bunch of people all over? Is it like really well networked, and it draws people in one at a time to try to see if they're going to be the new caretaker? I don't know, but I think that this was an issue from the beginning of the film, before Jack even goes to the interview at the Overlook. Okay, one other thing, if we're going to talk about people, I don't love Danny, if I'm being really honest. I know that's a weird thing to say because he's a child actor, and I've seen some child actors that knock it out of the park, and for me, Danny Lloyd does not. I'm so sorry. I think that the moments where his face is frozen in horror, that works as a still image for me. But he's not super effective with the dialogue. And I think maybe part of that is the direction of it. Maybe part of it is saying, Danny, you have to be dazed here. Danny, you have to be overcome by Tony in this scene. But it also could just be his ability to deliver. I don't know. It's probably a combination of the two, because for sure the direction here in a lot of scenes was like, you are seeing something in your mind that we can't see, and you have to be kind of not there. That is really hard to play for anybody. So, I mean, in terms of like the 3 leads, that's how I feel about them. I would also say that sound-wise, there's something very disorienting about the sounds that we're hearing, partly because even when we're hearing instruments, I can't quite put my finger on what instrument I'm hearing. Is every sound we hear done by a synthesizer? Sometimes it sounds like horns. Sometimes it sounds like gongs or cymbals, but is it all a synthesizer? Because I actually think that works for the film, that I'm not able to always put my finger on what the sound is that I'm hearing. I'm just really feeling the energy of it. And with that, we get a very slow, very deliberate pace to this film, which makes a lot of sense for Kubrick. And it makes sense for the film as well, because they let us linger with the shots. If you are interested in a film that moves fast, that is more action oriented, this isn't your film. It just isn't. And that's okay, because with any horror movie you name, there are people who love it and there are people who hate it. And that is true across every horror movie ever invented. So, The Shining, if you're somebody who wants like really fast action packed sort of stuff, probably going to want to go in another direction for this, because that's not what this film is trying to do. But let's start where we begin in the film. And so we're going to get this opening synth music. It's very pounding. We're going to get a crane shot. It's sort of going through a mountain pass over a lake that we're seeing. We're going to then get an aerial shot of the car driving. And it's important to establish how remote we are in so many horror movies. And so we're going to do that here. We're going to pull back and we're going to see this aerial view of a car that's driving and, through a winding mountain road. And there's just like nothing around it for a while. The music starts to incorporate this sound of almost a human wailing. And then we're going to get some credits rolling through. Then we get an aerial shot of the Overlook Hotel with no maids. Now, you can say continuity issue. Yeah. And what's up with the Overlook? I mean, I think we're always meant to be asking what's up with the Overlook. So why not start there? We're going to get title cards every now and then. So we're going to start the interview. So this is like the first benchmark that we need to hit. Jack is going to enter the lobby of the Overlook for the very first time. And he meets Mr. Ullman, who works for the Overlook. And then we're also going to be sort of going back and forth between scenes of him doing this interview and what's happening at the Torrance home. So Wendy and Danny are there. They're eating lunch. She's watching Roadrunner. She's reading Catcher in the Rye. And he's asking about living at the hotel for the winter. And she's like, I think it's going to be fun. He says, well, it's not like I have anybody to play with at home anyway. She's like, well, what about Tony? Is Tony looking forward to going to the hotel? And we're going to see Danny talk with his finger. Tony is in his finger. He doesn't want to go. And he always has this like kind of higher pitched, sort of raspier voice. I don't want to go. So we've established kind of a lot between these two in just a little bit. Like it's not a very social family. Danny's not very well acclimated socially. He's got this very accepted imaginary friend that Wendy has just sort of said, okay, this is part of our lives. And we know that there's some reservation about going to this hotel. We're going to go back to the interview. Jack is going to meet another one of the suits, a guy named Bill. And they're giving him this spiel, because here's the thing. It's an interview for Jack, but really they just want to lock this guy in because they have the harder selling position in this situation, knowing everything they know about the history of the hotel. So, Jack's been headhunted in some way. And the idea is he's supposed to take care of the Overlook for the winter. He was a former school teacher. He's a writer now. And possibly we should read that as he was fired for being drunk or other behaviors. They haven't said that in this scene, but just what I pieced together from everything we find out about him, that's what I'm gathering. Ullman is going to explain, okay, so the way this works is we're closed for the winter. It's just too expensive to keep the mountain roads open to get people up here to ski. So, can't do it. Too much snow. This place was originally chosen for its seclusion and its scenic beauty. And, this is the price we pay. So his job would entail running the boiler, heating different parts of the hotel at different times, doing some basic maintenance, repairing damage. It's like, but here's the thing, it's pretty isolating here for you and for your family. So that's a factor. And Jack's like, well, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I want 5 months so I can work on a writing project. And my wife and son, they're going to love it. Ullman's like, great, great, great. So any chance corporate told you about the tragedy that happened here? No? Okay, that's unusual. This has happened every single time. And they probably on purpose wait to get Ullman's the closer. He's like, they've already got you here. Like you already see how beautiful it is. You might as well just stay. Ullman's had to, this is where a lot of people have said thanks, but no in the past. So Ullman's like, yeah, so in the winter of 1970, there was this tragedy. My predecessor, not me, of course, but my predecessor hired a guy named Charles Grady as a caretaker. And he came with his wife and two girls. I believe he introduces the guy as Charles Grady here, but later we're going to meet Grady and his name is Delbert Grady. Am I right? Is there something about Grady's? Is this a middle name that we're dealing with here? What do we need to know? What am I missing? He came into this hotel with his wife and two girls. And then, things got weird. A little bit of cabin fever. And it led to him killing his wife and two girls with an axe and stacking them in a room in the West Wing, and then putting a shotgun in his mouth and pulling the trigger. Little bit of cabin fever. How's that? Try that on for size. So Jack's like, not going to happen with me. Not going to happen. And furthermore, my wife's going to be fascinated by this. She is a ghost story and horror film addict. Shout out to the ghost story and horror film addicts out there, okay? Shout out. Now, who's interviewing who here? Because really, they have a lot to overcome in their pitch, this hotel. But Jack is kind of desperate for work. And so now, is he just desperate for work? Or is he also already consumed by the hotel? And there's nothing these people can say that's going to bother him. Probably a bit of both. All right, we're going to fade to Danny, who's in the bathroom. He's talking to Tony in his finger. Tony's like, yeah, your dad got the job. And then Wendy's going to get the call from Jack. He got the job. Yay. But back in the bathroom, Danny and Tony are talking. Tony's like, just don't want to go. Danny's like, tell me why. Tony's like, no, tell me why. And so Tony gives in and he's going to show Danny visions. This is how it manifests for us. It's the best way to make it make sense to us. And so we're going to see the first time this vision of a bank of elevators and just a pool of blood pouring out from the sides of the elevators. And then Danny's going to see a vision of two twin girls standing next to each other in blue dresses. And we're going to see Danny doing the silent scream. This is like what's happening for Danny when he can't come out because Tony's in charge. So now we're going to see the doctor is making a house call to Danny because this manifested like a medical emergency. And so she's doing some checks to see if maybe this was a seizure. It doesn't seem like it was. He tells her about Tony, the little boy that lives in his mouth. And can she see him? Nope, he'll hide in my stomach. He doesn't want to be seen. And then she asks some more questions. He's like, nope, don't want to talk about Tony anymore. Tony, meanwhile, is like, stop talking about me. So there's a lot of secrecy here. And, Tony knows that nothing good can come of Danny actually sharing what Tony's role is in his life. So as much as his parents actually know that Tony exists, they don't know what the function is. So the doctor and Wendy are going to go out of the room to have a little conversation. Doctor's like, great news. Nothing is physically wrong with Danny. Could be that there are some emotional factors, but it turns out to be something like an auto hypnosis sort of a thing. But I don't really expect this to recur. Should be fine. Hey, we're just practicing medicine around here, okay? We don't know what happened to Danny. She doesn't know what happened to Danny. We're going to get more backstory. They've lived in Boulder for 3 months. They came from Vermont. Jack had been teaching there, doesn't teach there anymore. Now he's going to write. So Danny had started to talk to Tony actually way back, much earlier when he was in nursery school. And then, he hasn't been super social. And then he had this injury, kind of pulled him out of school. And the doctor's like, tell me about this injury. And this is where you see, and for me, this is really where I'm noticing for the first time this idea of the abusive pattern and how Wendy explains things to herself, because she knows full well how everything is going to sound that's coming out of her mouth, but she has absolutely explained it to herself, and she can absolutely make it sound softer for the doctor. But the doctor should be getting a lot of alarm bells going off with this explanation. So she's like, "What's this injury?" She's like, it was a dislocated shoulder. It's just one of those things. It was just an accident. My husband was drinking. He was in a bit of a bad mood, and he grabbed Danny's arm. And it's the sort of thing that you do 1,000 times and doesn't result in an injury. And this time it just happened to result in an injury. But hey, good news. Jack said never going to touch alcohol again, and he hasn't for 5 months. And the doctor's like, that's it. That's her face. Like, are you kidding? And that was my face, because Wendy, you know, uh, what else was Wendy prepared to do to put her foot down about this situation? Doesn't seem like a whole lot more than what she's done. We're now going to get the title card, closing day for the Overlook Hotel before, everybody has to leave, all of the guests, all of the staff, everybody is leaving the hotel, and now the Torrances are going to take over. So we're going to get, again, some more synth music, sounds like horns. We're going to get this aerial shot of the car driving through these mountain passes. And the whole family is in the car having a casual conversation about the Donner Party. And Danny's like, "Oh, don't worry, I already know about cannibalism. I saw it on television." Jack's like, "Yeah, great. He saw it on the television, being creepy." I don't know if he means to deliver everything creepy or if he just is Jack Nicholson. I can't tell. Okay, so they arrive at the Overlook. Mr. Ullman is going to greet Jack and Wendy, give them a tour. We're going to see the Colorado Lounge, which is obviously a huge, really ominous, very frequently used space within this hotel for the scenes that we're going to get with Jack working. It's a stunning room, absolutely stunning. And then we're going to see Danny. He's in the game room playing with darts. We're going to get some like strings sounding synth music, and he's going to see a vision of the twin girls again, the ones that he saw earlier. They look at each other, turn, and walk away. They'll have more to tell him, but in due time, Danny. Ullman is showing Jack and Wendy the staff wing. We've got staff leaving at that very moment. He's going to show them their living quarters. They think it's homey. Ullman's going to show them around the hedge maze, all locations that are going to be important to us in this film. He's saying that the Overlook was built from 1907 to 1909. It was located on an Indian burial ground. So if you've got Indian burial ground movie on your bingo card, go ahead, check that off here. Even though it's sort of subtle, it's not like in a poltergeist kind of way that it's going to come up again, but it's definitely something that they throw out there in this film. He's going to show them to the snowcat in case they need to get around. He's going to show them the Gold Room, which is the party venue. It's a beautiful banquet hall area. And then he's going to introduce Dick Halloran comes up. He's the head chef, and Danny is brought in. So we're going to get Dick to show Wendy and Danny the kitchen. Meanwhile, the others are going to tour Jack around. Dick's really friendly, and she's kind of intimidated by the size of this kitchen. And to be honest, I would be, look, I don't cook anything. So I would be so confused about what to do. I'd be in the dry goods section of the storage room pretty much all the time. But he's showing them around. He shows them the walk-in freezer. Dick is going to, at one point, call Danny Doc a couple times. And Wendy's like, "How did you know we call him Doc?" He's like, "Oh, I probably heard you say it." She's like, "Nope, that didn't happen." But she, okay, not going to press this too hard because what's the big deal? So Dick is then going to show her the storage room, all the dry and canned goods. He's reciting this litany of things she can find in there. And then we hear this sort of string whistling sound. And it gets louder and louder. And we go into Danny's point of view, and we see that Dick is saying to him, "How about some ice cream, Doc?" It's something that Wendy did not hear because he was still talking to her about all of the different foods that are in the storage room. Wendy and Jack are then going to go off with management. He's going to say, I'll get Danny some ice cream. And Danny and Dick are going to chew the fat a bit. They're going to talk about what just happened. So Dick is going to talk about The Shining. And see, this is an area, if I remember right, the book went into a lot more. In fact, this is why the book is called The Shining. But this whole idea of the power that Danny has and the power that Dick has, this was a more prominent thing in the book. It's prominent-ish in the movie, but it does feel like there could have been more weaved in a 2.5-hour movie. So I don't know. I don't know what parts you put in there, but I think the idea that Danny is coming into this hotel with a special power that can potentially fight off the hotel's getting its grip on Jack puts Danny squarely at odds with the hotel. If you sit with this for a second, it makes Danny and the hotel nemesis. But I don't know that plays so aggressively in the film itself. We get hints to it later, but the hotel should be threatened by Danny. And the hotel should really be threatened by Danny and Dick having this conversation. And what does the hotel do about it? Nothing. Anyway, so Dick and Danny are having this conversation. Dick's like, okay, so this thing that just happened, I call it The Shining. I used to be able to have entire conversations with my grandmother without either of us opening our mouths. I used to think nobody else had the shine, and then turns out other people do. You probably thought the same thing, right? And Danny doesn't really want to talk about it. He's not supposed to because Tony told him not to. And Dick probes a little bit. Tony tells Danny things, and he has maybe said a couple things about the Overlook. Danny's like, hey, are you scared of this place? Dick says, no. But the Overlook has something like the shine to it. Danny's like, well, is there something bad here? Dick's a little reluctant. He's like, well, when something happens, it can leave a trace of itself behind that people like you and me, we might be able to sense it. He says, some things happened here. Not all were good. Talk about making it a kid-friendly explanation, Dick. I mean, it does seem like shouldn't Danny be able to read all this anyway? Like, why are you hiding this from this kid? Danny says, well, how about room 237? He's like, yep. That's what I was trying to avoid. Dick says, yep, just don't go in there. Stay out. That's what I'm going to say. That's it. Look, Danny already knows a lot. Dick, just tell him what's up. Anyway, we're going to get to a month later. That's the title card. And Wendy is wheeling a tray of food through the Colorado Lounge. We're going to get Danny, iconically riding his trike his blue trike through the hotel, over rugs, onto the hardwood floors, into the kitchen. I love the sound design of this. There's something really like ASMR satisfying about Danny going over the rug part of it. I don't know. Wendy is going to bring breakfast to Jack. She's waking him up at 11:30. She's like, we probably just stayed up too late. So, is Jack really accomplishing much here? He's like, I should probably write after breakfast. She's like, let's spend time together. He's like, nah, I should write after breakfast. That's what I should do. She asks him about it. He says he has some ideas, but no good ones. And she's like, well, it's so nice here. He says, well, I'm so happy and comfortable here. He fell in love with it right away. He says when he came up for the interview, it was like he had been here before. It was like he knew what would be around every corner. He's like, woo. And again, if you have this interpretation that Jack was always kind of evil, has he been here before? Did he never leave? Is he alive for any of this? Like, there's so many different ways to read this film, and I'm curious where you land with it. We're going to then get the sound, Jack's supposed to be writing, but instead he's in the Colorado Lounge and he's throwing a ball against a wall as hard as he can. There's absolutely nothing on the typewriter at all. And he's throwing fairly aggressively. maybe a lot aggressively now that I think about it. Meanwhile, Danny and Wendy are playing. They're going to be buddies for 5 months, pretty much. We're going to follow them through the maze, while Jack is sort of ominously standing over a model of the maze. I bet he would. I bet by the end of this film, he wishes he would have looked at it a little more closely. But we're then going to see, as he's looking down on the maze, we're then going to see an overhead shot of the actual maze with Danny and Wendy finding their way to the center. Then we're going to go to Tuesday. It's evening. You know, I'm one thing that I do wonder about this film is we have a whole month go by with them getting acclimated with nobody there. And then all of a sudden, in the space of a week, all this stuff goes down. And why so suddenly does this escalate the way that it does? I would have thought maybe we would have gotten this to be either really drawn out or this stuff would have started right from the beginning. This is something that I feel like with the Amityville Horror, which has definitely some moments in it that feel like these two films are in conversation with each other. That film, they kind of get into the action fast, like pretty much right away. So there's not time that they have in the house where there's full peace. But in this film, I feel like we got a month with nothing eventful. And then all of a sudden, everything just rushes. So I'm trying to pinpoint what it was that made the hotel up the stakes so quickly. Okay, so it's Tuesday now, it's evening. Wendy's making dinner, she's watching the news, there's a missing woman and a snowstorm coming tomorrow. The snowstorm is the pertinent thing for her in this situation. We're still going to get Danny riding his tricycle through the hallways. He stops at room 237. Doesn't quite listen to Dick. He actually goes up to the door and chests it, and it's locked. But he sees a vision of the twins in a hallway, and he's going to get on his trike and he's going to right away as quickly as he can with ominous music behind him. So now we're going to go back to the Colorado Lounge. This time, Jack is actually typing something. He's more of the night owl worker. We're going to get sort of chimes synth sounds here. And Wendy's going to come in. She's going to approach him. And as she gets really close, he's going to yank the typewriter paper out of the typewriter. She's like, get a lot written today? He's like, mm-hmm. She says, okay, well, it's going to snow tonight. He says, what do you want me to do about it? Wendy says, well, don't be grouchy. Jack's like, I'm not grouchy. I just want to finish my work. Wendy says, okay, fair, totally fair. I'll come back later with some sandwiches so you can eat and maybe you can let me read something. And Jack looks pissed. The hotel, you can see the hotel's like whispering in his, it's like he has a little headset. The hotel's like, nope, don't let her do that. So Jack looks annoyed. He says, let me explain something to you. When you interrupt me, you break my concentration. You distract me, and then it takes time to get back to where I was. And he pulls the typewriter. He rips the typewriter paper up. He's like, new rule. If I'm in here, if I'm typing or if I'm not typing, if I'm in here, you don't come in. You got that? Think you can handle that, Wendy? And then he goes, get the F out. And she's a little unsettled. And I'm willing to bet Wendy has heard a lot worse from Jack. And I'm willing to bet that she has seen more than one bad mood. And she knows that this is sort of the warning before the really bad mood starts. So she's like, sure. And she's going to leave. And Jack's going to keep typing. You know, something that's interesting about this film is the dialogue, because it's the scenes are long and they're slow paced and there's so much about the visual construction. And it's not very often that we're going to get really important long dialogue scenes. And then when we do, we hit those really, really hard and they become iconic. But we get this little bit between Wendy and Jack here, and it makes you think because we don't get a lot of these really ominous dialogue-ridden scenes up until this point. Okay, we're just going to get a little blip for Thursday. Wendy and Danny are playing in the snow. We're going to get that sort of whistling sound, and Jack is just standing there dazed and sinister. So things have escalated fast. Now we're going to go to Saturday, 2 days after the last one, where the overlook is practically buried in snow at this point. Jack is typing in the Colorado Lounge. Wendy can't make an outgoing call. So she's going to go to Altman's office where there's a radio, and she's going to speak with the Forest Service. Has a little chat, lines are down, might stay that way because, it's winter and it's snowing. So the service is like, why don't you just leave your radio on for pretty much the rest of the winter? Like, that's the best way to get in contact with us. She's like, sure, that sounds good. And then she does what probably every radio operator everywhere hates. And it's the thing they always do in TV, where she's like, they're doing like the over. And at the end of the conversation, she says, over and out, which means your turn to talk, but I'm leaving. Anyway, that's always a pet peeve of mine, but they do that all the time in TV and movies for that matter. Okay, so Danny is riding his trike. He's going through the kitchen and the hallway, and then he gets to one hallway, and this is a pertinent hallway that he hasn't been to before that we've seen. The twin girls are standing at the end of it looking at him, and they're like, hello, Danny. And he is just frozen. Come play with us, Danny. And then we're going to intercut them standing there with images of them axe murdered on the ground, bloody. And then they're like, come play with us, Danny, forever and ever and ever and ever. And we're just seeing these really bloody images. And then Danny's like hiding his eyes, and then he opens his eyes again and the holes are fine. Nothing there. Danny is going to tell Tony that he's scared. And Tony's like, no, remember what Dick Halloran said. It's like pictures in a book. It isn't real. Okay. We're going to go to Monday. So we're going to get this snowstorm. Danny and Wendy are watching TV. Danny really wants to play with his fire engine, but Wendy's like, yeah, but it's in the living quarters and your dad's there sleeping. Maybe don't. Can you imagine walking on eggshells like this? I know there are people who walk on eggshells like this in much smaller quarters than what they've got. So if anything, I suppose that being in such a big space lets them avoid him so much of the time. But it's snowing and there's no way out. I mean, gosh, I can just feel that in my soul. So Danny's like, no, I really want my fire engine. I'll go, I'll be quiet. She's like, okay. So he's going to go to the living quarters, but you know who's not asleep? Jack. Jack is sitting up on the edge of his bed, and then he just turns and creepily looks at Danny. And Danny's like, I was just going to get my fire engine. And Jack's like, come here first. Let me hug you. In the weirdest ways possible, let me have affectionate moments with you. So we're going to see, I like this choice where he's sitting on the bed. We see the back of Jack and we see his reflection in the mirror as Danny's standing there. It's very like there's two sides of Jack here. Danny looks terrified, and Jack's like, come over here. And he's going to give him a hug and a kiss. And Danny's like, he just doesn't even want to interact at all. He's like not moving his face. He just wants to get out of this unscathed. And Jack's like, having a good time. Danny's like, yes, Dad. Jack's like, well, I want you to have a good time. Danny's like, yep, I am. Dad, do you feel bad? Jack's like, no, just a little tired. Danny's like, well, why don't you go to sleep? Jack's like, can't, too much to do. Danny says, do you like this hotel? Jack says, I do. I love it. Do you? Or he says, don't you? Danny says, guess so. Jack says, well, I want you to like it here. I wish we could stay here forever and ever and ever, which sounds sweet, except for what Danny just experienced with these two girls. Danny's like, Dad, you wouldn't hurt mommy or me, would you? Jack is a speck too slow to answer. It's like, what do you mean? Did your mother say that? That I would hurt you? Danny's like, no. Jack says, well, I love you, Danny. I love you more than anything else in the whole world. I would never do anything to hurt you. Never. You know that? And the very way he says all of that is creepy as hell. And again, is it meant to be creepy or is it meant to be Jack Nicholson? I think at this point, it's meant to be creepy. Um, but yeah, it's this very uncomfortable, like again, it feels like Danny has learned to walk on eggshells around his dad, probably way back from his injury, and that never changed. And I'm sure that Jack has sensed that from him. And fair enough, Jack, don't mess with your kid. So we go to Wednesday. It's basically whiteout conditions at the Overlook, and Danny is playing with a set of cars on the hallway rug as a ball gets rolled to him. But from whom? There is nobody there. So he's going to go investigate. Turns out room 237 is open, and there's like a key in the door, even. So the hotel's starting to do its thing. Meanwhile, Wendy is in the boiler room and she's going to hear Jack scream. He's screaming himself awake from a nightmare. She runs to him. She wakes him up and he's scared and he's confused. And I guess this is supposed to be a flicker of the real Jack, except my problem is that we saw the real Jack at the beginning of the film and he was also creepy. But anyway, he is confused and he seems like a guy who does not want to hurt his family. He dreamed that he killed Wendy and Danny. He cut them up into little pieces and he's crying and he's losing his mind. He's saying, and Wendy's like, it's going to be okay. But really, when you hear this confession, like, I would be like sleeping in what I would do in this situation, probably, first of all, I get on the radio right quick. Then I would grab every single hotel key and Danny, and I'd take both of us into a room so that he wouldn't know which one we were in. That's what I do for 5 months. And I do it. Hell, grab some food from the storage room. It'll keep. All right. Anyway, so that's what I would do, but that's not what she does. So she's trying to reassure him. She helps him sit back in his chair because he had fallen to the ground. And Danny is walking in slowly, very dazed because he had an experience in room 237. Wendy is like, Danny, come back later. We're doing some things. Danny doesn't look okay either. So Wendy goes to him and she finds him sucking his thumb and a bruise on his neck. He's not speaking. She's like, well, what happened to your neck? What happened to your neck? And he's not talking. And she hugs him and then she looks at Jack. She's like, you. He's sort of like, I really didn't do this. Like, he's so mystified. Look, this man has had some impure thoughts recently of a violent nature, but he didn't actually do this. So he is like, but she's fully accusing him. She's like, how could you do this to him? He's like, what? She's going to take Danny out of the room. And Jack's just confused, but then he gets angry. He thinks about it for a second. He's like, nope, I'm angry and I have a right to be. So he's going to walk angrily to the gold room where he is furious and he hears loud string we're gonna hear like a loud string instrument sound in the background. He is going to turn on the lights of the gold room. He gets in and he walks into an empty room and sits at the empty bar, but he really wants a drink. He would give his soul for a glass of beer. He rubs his eyes and then he opens them and he sees in front of him the bartender, Lloyd. For a second, when he just opens his eyes and we're just still on Jack's face and we don't know what he's seeing, which I think is a cool choice here. And then when we see the bartender, we see Lloyd standing in front of a full bar with all kinds of alcohol behind it. And Jack's going to order a bourbon and a glass. He wants to get as drunk as possible, pretty much. But there's no money in his wallet. But it's okay. His credit's fine. Just have some drinks. It's all good. No need to pay. Jack's going to compliment the bartender. And he's, just before he drinks, he says, here's to 5 miserable months on the wagon and all the irreparable harm it has caused. This man is bitter. He drinks. And Lloyd's asking him how things are. Things could be better, Lloyd. Just a little problem with the sperm bank upstairs. At this point, there is absolutely nothing delicate or cool about Jack. He is just mean. He's like, but nothing I can't handle. Lloyd's like, well, women can't live with them, can't live without him. Jack's like, so true. Never heard that expression before. Jack is just going to release now years of rage at Lloyd. He's like, I didn't lay a hand on him. I wouldn't touch a hair on his goddamn head. I love the little son of a bitch. And then he's talking about Wendy. He's like, that bitch, as long as I live, she'll never let me forget what happened. I did hurt him once, okay? It was an accident, could have happened to anybody, but it was 3 goddamn years ago, and he's sort of reenacting it violently. He's losing it. He is. I mean, I can absolutely see what this guy looks like when he's violently drunk. Like, how has Wendy stayed in that house? And I get how she has, but I can only imagine what a shell of yourself you'd have to be to live and survive in that environment. Like, because you can't do anything at all that'll set the person off. We're going to hear Wendy screaming. She's going to run with a bat in her hand to the gold room. Jack's sitting at an empty bar, no Lloyd, no bottles of alcohol, no glass of bourbon in front of him. She's crying. She's like, there's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. Turns out, like, it wasn't him. Turns out some woman tried to strangle Danny. Jack's like, are you out of your effing mind? He's not on her side anymore. Wendy's like, no, Danny told me. Jack's like, all right, fine, I'll check it out. So now we need to see what's happening with Dick Halloran. First, we're going to start on the TV news in Miami. We zoom out. Strangest camera choices in this scene. We zoom out. We see a bit of Dick Halloran's decor, his feet as he's lying in bed. He's watching the news about the snowstorm that's about to come to the Rocky Mountains. And then we're going to we look at his face and we zoom out on his face. And then we zoom in on his face. And we're getting this very like tinny whistling music in the background. And his eyes go wide because he is got an incoming message coming in from Danny. And he starts shaking. And he sees room 237. We're going to see Danny sort of shaking and drooling. We see inside room 237. We walk further. We go through the bedroom. It's kind of a cool room, a purple and green bedroom. And then we go into a yellow and green bathroom. And so now we're going to see that it's actually Jack that's walking inside it. So it might be both of them having visions. Danny's having the vision and he's transmitting it to Dick. And so Jack is in this bathroom now, and there's the shower curtain is, half drawn halfway into the tub, and somebody is in the tub and pulls it back. And it's this beautiful young woman naked. She stands up and she gets out of the tub. This whole thing is so slow. She very slowly walks over to him, and Jack is smiling, and he very slowly walks over to her, and they get very close, and she pulls him in and they kiss. And then we switch the shot, and we're going to see a close-up of his face as he's making out with this person who appears to now be motionless and wider than they were before. And then we see him, he looks at the reflection in the mirror and sees that he's making out with an old woman who looks to be long dead. She's no longer the thin woman that we saw earlier, and she's got like bed sores that are like gangrenous at this point. And so he freaks out about that. And he pulls her back. He's walking away stunned. She's cackling with laughter. And then we're going to alternate between her cackling with laughter and then her being in the bathtub, submerged in water, lying, looking dead and starting to rise. And Danny's seeing all of this shaking, which means Dick has seen all of this as well. And, in room 237, I don't think this is what Danny saw when he was in that room. I think that the hotel manifested these particular images differently to them. So I don't know. I can't, it's hard for me to picture it going down exactly this way with Danny. Um, but he did see an old woman, but the woman tried to strangle him instead of kiss him. So, you know, age appropriate violence. I don't know. Like, what's up? So this hotel is showing people visions that sort of match what the hotel decides they need to see. Jack is going to leave the room to the sound of cackling. Halloran calls the Overlook and can't get a hold of them. Jack's going to return to the living quarters and he tells Wendy, yep, didn't see a thing in that room. No way. I saw nothing. I did nothing. All good. Wendy is worried. She's like, look, Danny is asleep, but she's crying. He reassures her. She's like, yeah, but he has bruises. How could he have bruises? Somebody had to do that. Jack says, I think he did it to himself. Like, if you toss out his explanation, what else is there? He's like, it's like the episode he had before he came up here. We're going to see Danny in bed. He can hear this entire conversation in his mind. And he's wide eyed and he's seeing shots of the word red room written on a door. And he can hear Wendy saying, we have to get him out of here. And Jack says, wait, leave the hotel. And now we're hearing that wailing sound of the music, and Danny is silently screaming as the blood pours out of those elevators. That vision comes back. Jack is so angry now. He is just done. He's like, it is so typical of you to create a problem like this when I have a chance to accomplish something. Like, oh, I bet I could write my own ticket now if I went straight back to Boulder, right? He's like, Wendy, I've let you fuck up my life so far, but I'm not going to let you fuck this up. And he leaves and Wendy is crying. I mean, he is talking in such an abrasive way that he wasn't at the beginning of this. But once again, I don't believe this is the first time in her life she's heard him talking like this. Jack, meanwhile, is so angry. He's just creating havoc in the kitchen, knocking down pots and pans. He's walking through the hallway and then he hears music playing in the gold room. Weird. Shouldn't be music playing in the gold room, but it's old-timey music. There's a party. There's party decor in the hall. Halloran, meanwhile, doesn't like that he hasn't been able to reach this family. He calls the Forest Service. He confirms that the phone lines are down, but he's like, can you just check in on them through the radio? I'll call back in 20 minutes. So meanwhile, Jack goes to the gold room. This room is full and there's a party on. He's going to greet Lloyd. He's going to get more bourbon. His money is no good here, Lloyd says. Orders from the house. Jack's like, I want to know who's buying my drinks. Lloyd says, that's not a matter that concerns you. Jack is drinking. He's dancing to the music. And then he has a literal run-in with Grady. Grady, who's wait staff at this party, and he spills drinks all over Jack. And he's going to take him to the bathroom to clean him up. Really cool red and white bathroom, or it's like maybe a red pink color and white bathroom. And Grady's cleaning him up. He introduces himself. Jack recognizes him. He's like, have I seen you before? Grady says, nope. Jack's like, weren't you a caretaker here once? Grady says, nope. Jack's like, you're married? He says, wife and 2 daughters. Jack says, well, where are they? Grady's like, somewhere around, not sure. Jack says, you were the caretaker here. I recognize you. I saw your picture in the newspapers. You chopped your wife and daughters into bits and blew your brains out. Grady's like, doesn't ring a bell. Grady's like, strange. I don't have a recollection of that. Jack says, you were the caretaker here. Like, don't you even try. It's awkward. Grady says, sorry to differ with you. You're the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker. I know. I've always been here. Jack is going to laugh at this. Grady's like, did you know? So Jack doesn't really believe it. Grady sees new tactic. I don't know why he's even faking it with Jack to begin with. Grady's like, did you know that your son is attempting to bring an outside party into the situation? And then we're going to exchange the N-word a couple times, which is for me the most jarring thing about this film, watching it now. And then he says, your son has a very great talent. You aren't aware how great it is. He's using it against your will. Jack's like, well, he's a willful boy. Grady says, yeah, naughty if I may be so bold. Jack says, well, it's his mother. She interferes. Grady's like, well, perhaps they need a good talking to. Perhaps a bit more. My girls, they didn't care for the overlook at first. One stole a pack of matches and tried to burn it down. I corrected them. When my wife tried to prevent me from doing my duty, I corrected her. Jack kind of chuckles a little bit. That's what we're going to get about kind of the influence the hotel is having. But I do think this is an important scene in terms of how you interpret this movie. Because, first of all, at first, Grady's kind of pretending like he doesn't know what Jack is talking about, and then he kind of owns it. And for him to say, you are the caretaker, you've always been the caretaker, I know I've always been here. So has Jack always been there? Is Jack alive? Is Jack dead? Is this just like since the earlier that century, what are we looking at here? Is this is a spirit that just can't recollect anything other than what it remembered? Is time not really a factor here at all? Is it like maybe time just isn't important in this situation? So Grady is saying, like, you've always been the caretaker, but Grady does remember having harmed his family. And I wonder what spirit Grady thinks the purpose of, like, does he now suddenly remember being the caretaker? Doesn't seem like he does. So why does he think that he had to take care of his family? Is everybody at this party, were they all at some point a caretaker? Like, do they all have different relationships here? I don't know. I think like what's happening with the spirits at this hotel is kind of an interesting factor. And maybe the book answered some of these questions, but I don't remember. So Wendy is crying in the living quarters. She is talking through her plan for escape. She needs to escape. She needs to get Danny out of here and to get checked out. And so she's trying to explain to herself what's going to happen. And I guess she's also reciting it or like practicing it for when she has to tell Jack. She hears Danny saying red rum over and over again. He's sitting up in bed and he's using Tony's voice. She can't wake him from the daze that he's in. And Tony's like, Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. I love the way they're lit in this scene because his room is dark, but there's light coming in from the hallway. So they're beautifully lit from the side. Wendy says, wake up. Tony's like, yeah, Danny can't wake up. Not happening. Jack's going to go into Ullman's office where we can hear the Forest Service trying to reach them, but Jack's going to pull the components out of the radio so it doesn't work anymore. And then Halloran's going to call the Forest Service. They're like, sorry, the Torrances didn't answer. So now we're going to get 8 a.m. on screen. Halloran's on a Continental flight, the airline carrier. And they're going to arrive in 20 minutes. So he's taken a red eye to get from Miami to Colorado. And he is going, probably flew into Denver. And so we're going to now go to the Colorado Lounge. Jack's typing. He's hard at work. Great. The flight lands. Halloran calls for a snowcat. We're going to see him driving in really bad conditions. Wendy and Danny are watching Roadrunner. She's worried and he is dazed. Wendy's like, I'm going to go talk to Daddy. I'll be right back. Tony says, yes, Mrs. Torrance. And she grabs the bat so she has a weapon with her and she leaves the room. And she's going to go to the Colorado Lounge where nobody is there anymore. She calls for Jack. She turns, she walks all the way through. She turns back. She looks at the typewriter and she sees what he's been writing. And there's a page in the typewriter that says, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But it's written all over the page. And then she starts going through all the pages he's been typing. And they all say, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And the thing that I always think about when I see this scene is that somebody in props had to, I don't know if there was a way for them to do it where they found a font that could do this. So maybe they actually had to typewrite all of these pages that look totally different Like they're all full of the words, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But the layout of the words is different on every single page. And she flips through a lot of them. And so somebody had to create all of these pages. Wild. What a detail. That must have taken forever. Okay, so we're going to now see like a voyeur view from behind the wall behind her. She can't see this person. And then Jack comes into frame and we see the camera over his shoulder. And he's like, how do you like it? She screams and she turns. He steps towards her. And now he's stepping. He is sort of in slow pursuit of her. He's walking forward. She's stepping backwards. She's like, well, I wanted to talk with you. He says, what are you doing down here? She says, I wanted to talk with you. He's like, okay, let's talk. And he smiles creepily. He says, what do you want to talk about? She's like, I can't remember. And she's just terrified of this situation. He is not okay. And she's got her bat, like she choked up on it and she's ready to swing it. And so she's like, she can't remember. Danny is seeing this conversation and he's hearing this conversation in his mind, and then he's seeing the bloody elevator scene again. Jack's like, well, maybe it was about Danny. I think we should discuss him. Danny is seeing the word red rum again. Jack's like, we should discuss what should be done with him. Wendy's crying. She's like, I don't know. Jack's like, I don't think that's true. You see, I think you have definite ideas about what should be done with Danny. I'd like to know what they are. Wendy is crying. She says, I think he should be taken to a doctor. He says, you think he should be taken to a doctor? When? Wendy's like, as soon as possible. He's like, as soon as possible. He's just being so mean, and he's imitating how terrified she is. He says, you believe his health might be at stake. She's like, yes. She says, and you're concerned. Are you concerned about me? She says, of course. He says, have you ever thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities? He says, I've agreed to look after this hotel till May the 1st. I've signed a contract. Like, do you know what a moral and ethical principle is? Do you know what would happen if I reneged on it? He doesn't use that word, but he's like, has it occurred to you? Has it? He's really, oh my goodness. He's so given over to the hotel at this point, and she's terrified, and she's just slowly backing up. And so now they start to go up the stairs, and all of this is just this most prolonged scene. And she's confused. She wants to go back to her room. She needs to think things over. He says, you've had your whole life to think things over. She's waving the bat at him as she's going up the stairs. He's like, Wendy, darling, light of my life. And he hits all those consonants he punches them. He says, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to bash your head in. No, I'm just going to bash your brains in. She's swinging the bat. And he's like, stop swinging the bat. Just give me the bat. Give me the bat. Give me the bat, Wendy. And she hits him twice and she knocks him down the stairs. Now, look, I think a lot of us who are fans of this movie are very well aware of Kubrick's relationship with Duvall here and how many times she had to do this scene. And this has been long cited as something that was like pretty traumatic for her. Before I ever knew that, I just thought the scene was incredible. I feel the peril. I feel how very unhinged he is and how very like it's like the hotel is speaking through him. So I mean, yeah, but when you add the layer of what the onset conditions were for this, it's in a way, it adds even more of the terrible quality that this scene actually needs. I don't know, but it is also really hard to process. So she has knocked him down the stairs, and then we cut to the next scene, which is Jack is being dragged into the kitchen by Wendy, and he's slowly coming to. And again, I can't help but think that must have been exhausting. She had to pull him down the first little flight of stairs, out of the Colorado lounge, through the hallway into the kitchen, and now into the storage room is where she's trying to get him. And wow, I mean, it must be exhausting. She how did she, that must have been so terrifying. I sometimes wish they would have shown us that. I think that's the kind of thing that gets cut for time for sure, because you don't need to see the whole process of Wendy dragging him. But if I'm watching it, I'm thinking the whole time, oh my God, he's going to wake up any second. And she must have been thinking that too. So he is starting to come to. She's fiddling with the storage locker door, and then she finally gets it open. She pulls him inside. He's awake, but really disoriented as she runs out of the room and locks him in. He gets up, his ankles hurt. She's going to grab a knife because she's in the kitchen. So she has another weapon. He is so angry, and he's like, open the door, let me out of here and I'll forget the whole thing. But you know he won't. And she's crying. And then you can see him try a new tactic. He says, and we're seeing the camera set up underneath him. So we're looking up to his face, which makes it even creepier. And he's like, Wendy, baby, I think you hurt my head real bad. I am dizzy. I need a doctor. Wendy stands. She's like, well, I'm going to go. I need to get Danny down the Sidewinder and the Snowcat. So I'll bring you back a doctor. And Jack's smiling. Not the response we want for Wendy here. He's smiling. He says, you've got a big surprise coming to you. You're not going anywhere. Check the Snowcat and the radio. And he just starts laughing. So Wendy is going to run to the Snowcat. She's going to find parts have been removed. We didn't see him do that, but we know that the radio has components removed as well. So she's out of luck. Title card, 4 p.m. We're going to get that gong sound, and we're going to see Jack sleeping in the storage room, and a knock on the door wakes him up. The hotel has had just about enough of him. This guy is totally inept. He had one job. They got one guy to do their dirty work. And no, he can't get it together for 5 months. So it's Grady who's come to the door to speak with him. He's like, we have something to discuss. Jack says, well, I'll deal with the situation when I get out. Grady's like, oh, will you? Will you now? He says, I and the others believe your heart isn't really in this, that you don't have the belly for it. Jack says, well, give me one more chance. Grady says, you know, your wife's stronger than we thought. She's resourceful. She got the better of you. Jack's like, just for the moment. Grady says, you're going to have to deal with this in the harshest way possible. Do you hear me? Do you hear what I'm saying to you, Jack? It's the only option. And Jack's like, well, there's nothing I look forward to with greater pleasure. He gives his word on that, and the door is unlocked for him. So the hotel can do these things. It can lock and unlock doors. Weirdly, in room 237, it actually used a key to do that. But yeah, they can just do what they need to around here. So meanwhile, we're going to see Dick and a Snowcat going to the Overlook, and we're going to see what's happening with Danny and Tony. We're doing the whole red rum thing. Wendy is asleep in her bed. Danny approaches her nightstand with Tony going, red rum. And he grabs the knife that she had. And you're just sitting there thinking, is Tony about to kill Wendy? And then Danny walks over to the mirror where he grabs an open container of lipstick. Now, look, I know this is a small detail to take issue with. Who leaves a tube of lipstick open and upright? Why? Why would you dry out your lipstick like this? No, nobody does this. It's like they just wanted to make it easier for Danny. So because he had a knife and he had to get the lipstick, and they didn't want to have him holding a knife and trying to open lipstick to probably cut himself. So they just said, okay, we're going to make this easier. We're going to we're going to take the top off of lipstick. We're going to wind it open, and then we're going to leave it face up on the counter. And he just grabs it. But this is not how Wendy would have left her lipstick. I know it's the smallest detail in the world, but it bothers me. Okay, anyway. So he grabs the lipstick, he's got the knife, and he's going to write red rum on the door back towards where Wendy is sleeping. And then he starts shouting red rum. He's saying red rum the whole time. And then he starts shouting it. And now it's transitioned into Danny's voice. So it's no longer Tony's voice, it's Danny's voice now. And Wendy is woken up by this just in the nick of time. She sees Danny standing over her bed with the knife, which is already pretty scary. But she's going to take the knife from him. And then she's going to see murder in the reflection on the mirror, because that's what red rum spelled backwards. And she's going to scream as Jack gets to the door of their suite with his axe and he starts trying to break down the door. So they're going to hide in the bathroom. It gives them another door to go through before they get to him. He gets to them. She is going to open up the bathroom window and send Danny out of it. He's going to slide down the snowbank and out. He's safely outside. She, however, can't fit through the window. Jack has broken down the door to get into the suite. He says, Wendy, I'm home. And then he's going to limp over to the bathroom, finds a door lock. He knocks and he's like, little pigs, let me in. Not by the hair of your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. So we're going to get a little nursery rhyme situation going there with the three little pigs. And he starts chipping away at the door with his axe. She's screaming. She's now standing next to the door because she can't get out the window. And she's holding her knife, ready to strike. And he gets a full sliver in the door and says the famous line. He puts his face in and says the famous line, here's Johnny. Once again, so many moments in this movie that you know what movie it's from, even if you see a still image. He's going to reach through to open the door to unlock it. And she whacks at him with a knife and cuts him. And it's going to end badly, except for the fact that Halloran drives up at that point and they can both hear the snowcat outside. Danny has heard this as well. He's running into the kitchen. For some reason, he ran back inside the house. I don't know. He didn't have a jacket. He's probably freezing. He's going to hide in a kitchen cabinet and Jack is limping through the kitchen. Wendy is in the bathroom crying. She's like, oh my God, Danny. Dick is going to walk into the hotel. Jack's limping through the hallway looking for a place to hide. And he hears Halloran saying, anybody there? Halloran is slowly walking through the hallway towards reception. And I can't help but think, wasn't really this much distance from the front door of the hotel to the reception desk? This seems like an unusually long distance for him to walk. And I can't remember now that I'm thinking about this, if that's how long a distance it was when Jack first walked into the hotel for the interview. Of course, if it isn't right, then that makes perfect sense as the overlook is disorienting. But still, I'm wondering about it. So Halloran's walking through and gets to an area where there's like a support beam that Jack is hiding behind. And Jack comes out and he swings the axe and he connects it into his chest and kills Halloran. Danny screams because he is connected to Halloran and Jack hears and he knows where Danny is. So Jack's now going to start pursuing Danny. He's limping though. He's calling Danny boy. Danny is running out from his hiding spot. Wendy, meanwhile, she's on her own running tour through the house. She's running up the stairs in the staff quarters and we can hear chanting, and so can she, which is unusual because there shouldn't be people there chanting. So she looks into one room down a hallway and she sees this shot of a party goer on a bed, like lying back in bed, and a guy in a bear suit. Is it an assless bear suit? Giving him a blowjob. And then they pause and they look up at her and she's like, oh my God, people, what's happening? What is happening with the ghosts? She stumbles back terrified. Jack, meanwhile, follows Danny to the outside and he thinks this would be so much easier if I just turned on the lights so I could see where Danny is. So he does. And then Danny's going to run out from behind the snowcat to go into the maze. Jack will follow him into the maze. And this is such a cool shot, this whole sequence through the maze. And I'm trying to figure out, technically speaking, what the terms are here for how this is shot. Is the camera on a dolly being pulled through the snow? Is that what I'm looking at here? Because it doesn't seem handheld. Um, but it really puts us in the action and it puts us in this pursuit. So Danny is running through the maze. He's leaving footprints in the snow. And if you're watching this for the first time, it's like, oh my God, everywhere he goes, he's going to leave a footprint. We're getting loud string music, Jack shouting, Danny. He's bellowing and he's following Danny's footsteps, of course, because he's getting an actual roadmap to everywhere that Danny's going. Wendy is still running through the house. She's running into the kitchen, through the hallway. She finds Halloran dead. She then turns around and sees another party goer she's never met before who shouldn't be there with a head wound. And she is running. And Danny is running in the maze, and we're going to hear more of this chanting music, and Jack is bellowing, and it's really at a crescendo now. Wendy runs into a hallway that's now covered in cobwebs. It wasn't before. And not only that, there are a whole bunch of skeletons. Is this the gold room or is this a hallway? There are so many skeletons that are partying. There's even one standing prepared to serve drinks. Is that skeleton greedy, perhaps? All of this was never there before. Jack is getting tired. He's been in pursuit of Danny, but he's freezing, he's limping. Danny has gotten far enough ahead because of the fact that Jack is limping that he has enough time to start backtracking in his own footsteps. And he very patiently goes back pretty far in his own footsteps. And then when he gets far enough away, he takes a new path and he covers his new footsteps up behind him so that he can trick his dad. Wendy is going to get to that elevator hallway where we've seen Danny have all those visions of the blood pouring out. And then Wendy actually sees the blood pouring out. Again, this is the hotel playing tricks on them and showing them what it wants to show them, but just pure terror, right? Shelley Duvall at this point, she just spends the whole end of this movie an absolute wreck. Danny is going to wait on the side of the maze wall, waiting for his dad to pass and get confused. He doesn't want to be heard. So Jack gets to the spot where Danny's footsteps end and he gets very confused. He's shouting for Danny, and then he picks a direction and he starts to walk away. Danny comes out of his hiding spot and he's going to run back through his existing footsteps because he left a trail that he can now follow to get out. So really, really smart. Top-notch, wise move from Danny, all of it. Jack is still stumbling through the maze. He's confused. He's cold. Danny is running out, knowing exactly how to get out of the maze. And Jack, at this point, can't find the exit or Danny, but he could find the exit if he just backtracked. He just wants to find Danny. So Wendy is running outside. She finds Danny coming out of the maze. She's going to throw down the knife. She hugs him. Jack is delirious at this point. He doesn't know what to do. And you can only explain this by making him be delirious, because otherwise, if he wanted to save himself to live another day, he'd just follow his own footsteps out. But he's not doing that. So Wendy and Danny are going to get into Halloran's Snowcat. Jack can hear the Snowcat start, which is about when you would like to think he'd start to backtrack through his own footsteps. But he's probably getting hypothermic at this point, and he's limping and he's just a mess. And so Wendy and Danny are going to drive away. Jack is bellowing for Wendy, and then he falls to the ground. And the next day we see him frozen solid, just sitting where he was. Because at this point, the hotel's like, look, if you can't get out of here yourself, there's nothing we're going to do to help you. Okay. This man even had an axe. Is there nothing he could do to cut through the maze? Anyway. All right. So we're going to see closing shots of this film. We're going to see the gold room. We're going to start zooming in on a bunch of pictures on the wall. We zoom into one particular picture. We're hearing some old-timey music playing again. And we zoom in on this one group photo that Jack is in the front of. And it's from the Overlook Hotel's fourth of July ball from 1921. I mean, he's always been there. And that's the movie. I mean, so much in this film. Again, look, there are details that I don't love. And I think the character that I have the hardest time with is actually Jack. Not really the person that people pan the most for the role, but I do think that because of the nature of this casting choice and the way that they choose to play this character, it just gives me certain interpretations of the film, and that's what I have to run with. But I love the fact that this film has just so many moments that when you watch it, you're watching The Shining. And like, even people who've never seen this film, I bet there's a whole bunch of moments where you could say, what film is this? And they'd still know the answer. So impressive what was built here. So that's what I thought about The Shining. What did you think about The Shining? I would love to know your thoughts. And just as importantly, I'd love to know how scary you think this movie is, because my scary meter is busted. I've watched so many horror movies over the years that I'm just desensitized to them. So how scary do you think this is? Pull out your scary meter and write this one from 1 to 10, 1 being not scary at all, 10 being the scariest thing I've ever seen, and anywhere in between. Let's see where we land. And next time we are going to be on day 30. We're going to watch Terrifier from 2016. It's your basic creepy clown movie. It's low budget gore. It's gory, for sure gory, but it's definitely not real. It's very self-aware and makes a lot of fun of itself. If you're not sure if you're into this kind of film, I would probably equate it to like a Nightmare on Elm Street, maybe, in terms of the tone of it. And yeah, it has gore, like, let's say The Collector, but it is much more, it has a lot more comedic moments. And my goodness, hard not to love Art the Clown. I mean, find somebody who loves their job as much as Art the Clown does. That's what I say. So I hope that you'll join me for that one. And, in the meantime, happy EEKtober, everybody. Get spooky, get donuts.